What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Lost Tangent Outpost. My name is Spada, and welcome back to another episode of the MULTIVERSUS Living Roster. Today, we're discussing Adult Swim. Finally. I know this has been a topic that a lot of you guys have been waiting for a while, and I definitely have been wanting to cover this myself as well. Now, normally the way that we do this show is I start out by discussing the results of the previous week, but I'm going to try to do something a little bit different this episode. First, we're going to discuss the main topic of today's video, and at the end, we'll go over the results of the last episode, and then I'll give you guys all the results of last week's poll. I just want to experiment a bit with the arrangement of the show and see how y'all feel about it. Alright, so when I mention Adult Swim, I'm sure a ton of you guys already have an ideal representative in mind, but our polls can only have up to 5 options, so there's a good chance I might not mention the one that you have in mind, but we'll see. I want to start out by saying that we are going to focus entirely on animated shows. I know that Adult Swim has had some awesome and successful shows that were live action, and I mean no disrespect to them by any means, but this just simplifies the options a bit for me. Later on in this series, we'll do a few wildcard episodes where we talk about franchises that lost in previous polls and even try to get in some of the more obscure franchises and give them a chance to get into this prediction. Let's go ahead and start this off with Robot Chicken.
Hey, wait!
Hi?
You said you were only going to be focusing on animated shows.
Right, yes I did.
Robot Chicken isn't animated, that's stop motion.
Well, I mean, it's literally called stop motion animation. Look, I can't do this and not talk about Robot Chicken. It's easily one of the best Adult Swim shows ever made.
Well, so is Tim and Eric.
I know. Look, I have to find some way to narrow down the choices. I promise shows like Tim and Eric will come up again at some point.
I'll remember you said that.
Okay, do that. We good?
Sure, I guess so.
Anyways, Robot Chicken, as I just said, is easily one of the best shows ever to air on Adult Swim, and it is certainly one of the most recognizable. And I know there might be some inclination to reject this idea because it's really just a skit and parody show. It doesn't really have its own characters or narrative and all that. But the introduction of every episode has the actual Robot Chicken in it, and I feel like this could very easily be a character. And using that as a character, they could pay reference to some of their best bits. And like my point about Sheldon Cooper, this could be a clever way to sneak in references to other WB properties or characters that would otherwise be excluded because they're simply too obscure or their franchise is already overrepresented. I can't even imagine a class for this one, but I'm sure they can come up with a way to make them fit any class, so I'll just suggest that we make them a tank because we don't have that many. Next up, I want to bring up one of my personal favorites, Aquateen Hunger Force. I think this might be the first show I watched on Adult Swim. I can't remember for sure. It's definitely one of the first Adult Swim shows. As such, this one is a classic. It follows Master Shake, Frylock, and Meatwad as they exist. There's not really a central plot to the show as a whole. Each episode has its own little narrative, but given that the show's production is made up of some of the original crew behind Space Ghost Coast to Coast, it makes sense that it's as funny as it is. When thinking about who would rep the show, it's tough because I want to say Frylock. He's the only one who regularly demonstrates any real usefulness, but Meatwad can shapeshift, and Master Shake has his moments too. I'll let you guys discuss this in the comments. Either way, I think most of us can agree it would be amazing to get Aquateen Hunger Force represented in MULTIVERSUS. Then I want to talk about the Boondocks. This is another show from the early Adult Swim days. This is one my college roommates and I would enjoy together. It had a poignant perspective on social issues, but it also was just flat out hysterical. Beyond that, it embraced an anime aesthetic to a point where they even made some really dope action sequences in the show. I think it would be a total mistake not to have this show appear in the game somehow. It's just legendary. Given that Huey and Riley are both voiced by the same actor, Regina King, I think it'd be just as likely to have either one of them make it in, and the show definitely paints them as very different types of characters, so while it's possible they could share a moveset, I'd expect them to be represented individually. As to which of them I think is most likely, that's not something I can say, but you guys should definitely discuss this in the comments as well, and let me know who you guys think is most likely. I could see either one of them. I think both of them could be put in as an assassin or brawler class pretty easily. Since they spend so much time in the show with airsoft guns, I think it's also likely they could have some projectile attacks as well. In either case, this is another one that just seems like it would be a huge mistake to ignore. The next show I want to talk about is one I don't know a ton about, but I remember it being super popular as well, Metalocalyps, a show about a death metal band called Death Clock that's equal parts dark, violent, and funny. It's incredibly vulgar, and the band members are all complete morons, and that's really what brings the levity. They have this humongous amount of power and sway in their universe, but all 5 of them are lucky to even be alive with how careless they are. They take the most mundane tasks and turn them into fantastical nightmares. Considering how they could work in a game like MULTIVERSUS, there's some pretty easy stuff to reference. Plenty of simple punches and attacks from the show could work as basic attacks, and they've got their instruments and all types of other items that they could use as weapons for specials. The real question is, which of the 5 members is most likely? This one's really hard to say. The characters all seem to have a fairly even amount of screen time, but I think that I'd give this one to Nathan Explosion, the lead singer of the band. He's always front and center anyways, and of all the idiots in the group, he's the one with the most brain cells, not that that's saying much. And the last show I want to bring up today is Venture Bros. This is another one where my experience with the show is limited, but whenever I did see this show, there was always a ton of action, so it works in my mind to have this show represented as well. As I do with all the shows whenever I don't have a lot of experience with them, I have sat through a few episodes and watched some highlights to get an idea of what this show is about and try to understand which characters make the most sense to have adapted into characters for MULTIVERSUS. Now, I know the main characters are Hank and Dean and all that, and so it does make sense to have one of them take this spot, but based on what I'm seeing, the one that makes the most sense to me is Brock, the family's bodyguard. He seems to be positioned as the show's resident badass. It appears he gets replaced in the 4th season of the show, but even still. That said, I'm sure there are a lot of you that are bigger fans of this show than I am, so absolutely let me know in the comments who you think is most likely to make it from the show, if anyone. If it does end up being Brock, I think he fits the role of tank or brawler really well. Now, I expect there's at least one person in here that wants to comment, hey, where's Rick and Morty? So let me go ahead and explain that we already have Rick included in the living roster due to the early leak that showed both him and Gandalf. And while I'm aware that there have been rumors of Morty's inclusion, I wanted to give the time of today's show to a franchise that we don't have represented in MULTIVERSUS. We will definitely talk about this some more, and it is still very likely that we'll get to include Morty at some point. So now that I've gone over the shows that will appear in our poll today, let's quickly discuss the results of the last episode. So last episode we talked about Cartoon Network shows, and I provided you with 5 options for shows to be represented in our living roster. Here are the results from that episode. This is by far the closest vote we've had to date, and in the first few hours, it was looking like it could go either direction, but by the end of the first day, we had a pretty clear winner. The winner of last week's poll is Regular Show, and it appears that most people agree they'd work as tandem characters. So with that, let's go ahead and get these 2 in our living roster. Awesome. Now with the first of our new 12 slots filled, it's time for this episode's poll. Given everything I mentioned about the 5 Adult Swim shows, which of these 5 do you think is most likely to end up in MULTIVERSUS? Robot Chicken, Aquateen Hunger Force, The Boondocks, Metalocalyps, or Venture Bros. You can vote in one of 2 polls. The first is located on the channel's community page. Simply go to that page and you'll see the poll from this week's episode at the top of that page. While you're there, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can be alerted as soon as the next episode goes live. Otherwise, you can go to the custom poll I made on a website called Straw Poll. You can find the link to this poll by looking in the description of this video or in the comments where I've pinned a comment containing the link. All right, that's that. I hope the new format of the show wasn't too jarring. If you guys decide that you like it this way, let me know, or let me know if you prefer me covering the results of the previous episode in the first half of the video. Thank you guys, everyone, for coming by. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Until next time, later.